Before I get started, I just want to say thank you to Wayne and the society. This whole thing started through an email I sent out to Wayne during when I was first conducting research for this topic, and so it's great to kind of see this sort of culminate in a presentation like this. And I also want to thank Ron for allowing me to Zoom right from the Ripley family home. Some of the history we're going to be talking about took place inside this house, and so this is a really special opportunity to be able to present out of here. So I titled this lecture, Reverend Ripley's Prophecy, Samuel Ripley, his son Ezra, in the Fight for Abolition. Now, we'll get into why I titled it Reverend Ripley's Prophecy. There's this moment where he wrote to his older sister, Mary Moody Emerson, and his words turned out to be pretty prophetic, and we'll explore why. So before we do that, though, one second. There we go. Perfect. So I want to just explain where we are in our research at the Old Manse. So this is pretty much new research for us, a lot of this. There are some previously published works that have been, that are out there. But in regards to an individual like Ezra Ripley, Samuel's son, this is pretty old. 1863 is the last piece of published information focusing on Ezra. There's of course the remarkable Mrs. Ripley, which probably makes Sarah Ripley, the mother to Ezra and the wife to Samuel, one of the more well-known individuals of the Ripley family. But while that text, it spends some time with Samuel and Ezra, it really focuses on Sarah. So we're gonna really kind of do a deep dive into Samuel and Ezra's life here. Now, there are some limitations right now with this research given the circumstances. There are a collection of papers at the Massachusetts Historical Society and the Harvard Library that I have not been able to get to because of COVID. And so I imagine once I get access to those papers and are able to dig through, things will change and evolve, and this story will develop. So sort of stay tuned in a sense. And I guess my plug for the Old Manse is that if you want to see some of the latest research, say next year, about this history, I recommend that you all come to the Old Manse and take one of our enslavement and freedom tours, which focuses on what the information that I'm going to be presenting here today. So that's my plug for the Old Manse. And with that out of the way, I'm going to get started. So when I say Samuel Ripley's prophecy, what I am talking about is this prophetic moment where Samuel Ripley is writing to his older sister, Mary Moody Emerson, and he's writing a lot. Some of the stuff turns out not to be true. For example, he says that his whole family are proud abolitionists. This turns out not to be the case, and we'll explore that a little bit, in the next couple slides. But he also believes that he is not going to witness the glorious event, what he calls it, of emancipation, that he's going to die before that happens. However, he follows that up by saying that next generation, so his children's generation, will see slavery end here in America. And so, he would be correct. But I think, though, that little did Samuel know that one of his sons, Ezra Ripley, is really going to take the words of his father and turn that into action, and then turn that into military service, and take an active part in ending slavery in the United States by participating in the Civil War. So that's really going to be the exploration of this presentation. We're going to look at Samuel Ripley's words and then see how Ezra took those words and sort of made them into action. So before we get to Samuel, a bit of background about his family life. So he grew up in the Old Manse in Concord, Massachusetts. The Old Manse was built in 1770 for the Reverend William Emerson and his wife, Phoebe Bliss Emerson. Now, William Emerson is known in the town of Concord as the Patriot Preacher for his work in the pre-revolutionary period, and he was really involved in patriot politics. But when the revolution broke out, he was one of the first individuals to join the conflict and went up to Fort Ticonderoga to help out in the war effort. However, William does not live long after he commits to service in the Continental Army. He dies in Rutland, Vermont, on his way home after suffering from dysentery in 17 1776. Now, the Old Manse itself, the home, is a home that is has a history of both freedom and enslavement, because this first generation did own 3 slaves. Their names were Frank, Phyllis, and Kate. Phoebe brought Phyllis and Kate into the household through marriage, but William owned Frank. So so the combination of the 2 families, there were 3 individuals who were enslaved at the Old Manse. Now, after the death of William, Phoebe is now a widow. She ends up marrying Reverend Ezra Ripley, who is William's successor. And at around that same point, slavery is outlawed here in Massachusetts, and so those 2 of the 3 enslaved individuals, one being Frank, who actually was sent up to Fort Ticonderoga and disappeared off the historical record. Phyllis and Kate were let free, and so their fates are still relatively a mystery to us today. But that is kind of the end of this house's history of enslavement, but it's one that sort of, this house's history is rooted in slavery. And so that's going to be really in the back of a lot of these individuals' minds as they really fight for abolition. Now, Samuel, their eldest son, is born in 1783. And Samuel he's the product of a new America, of the United States. 1783 is the end of the American Revolution and the start of the United States. So Samuel is a product of that. He also is very much a product of his father. Ezra was the minister of Concord for over 60 years. And Samuel is very much the good son. He follows in his father's footsteps. He goes to Harvard. He then becomes the minister, the Waltham's Unitarian minister. And this is in stark contrast to his brother, Daniel, who's a lawyer and ends up going down south, and sort of much to the dismay of his father. But Samuel is the good son. He becomes Waltham's minister. He ends up marrying a woman named Sarah Alden Bradford, and they have 6 children together. And at this point in their history together, Sarah starts the Ripley School. Now, in 1841, upon the death of Samuel's father, Ezra, Samuel inherits the Old Manse. He rents the house out to the Hawthorns, Nathaniel and Sophia, for a period of about 3 years. But after they leave, and he is starting his retirement, he slowly moves his way into the Old Manse, and by 1846, he is there with his family, ready to enjoy his retirement. Now, alongside this, sort of in Samuel's final sort of 7 years of life that we can really track, Samuel is becoming this sort of rabid and rampant abolitionist. Though this wasn't always the case, because he believed in sort of gradual emancipation. He believed that eventually all of the United States would be free, but this would happen over time and through containment. And as long as slavery didn't spread, it was fine. And so this really characterized the view of many people up north, which was that of anti-slavery, which was the gradual ending of slavery. Abolition was the immediate end to slavery. And so in the 1840s, as the tide kind of shifts here in Massachusetts, so too does Samuel's outlook on this issue. He decides that and believes that slavery needs to end now, and we can't wait another 10, 20, 30 years. And so in 1843, in the same letter that he writes to his older sister, Mary, he declares his family a family of proud abolitionists. Though when we explore Sarah a little bit, this turns out not to be entirely true. He also writes a lecture on abolition, probably in this very home right here. And in part, it says that 3 million of our fellow beings are in this good land of liberty, doomed to slavery, denied all the rights and privileges of men, created in the image of God, bought and sold as cattle and chattel. So he is, he's really intense in his rhetoric and doing what he can as a minister and as a minister in sort of his final days in the ministry. And he is also, in 1845, one of his last actions as minister in Waltham is that he signs the protest against American slavery. So this was a really big, important moment for Samuel. This was really a feather in his cap that he was a part of this signing. Now, I always wonder what would have happened if Samuel had lived longer and what he would have contributed to. But unfortunately, Samuel's life is cut unexpectedly short. On the Monday before Thanksgiving in 1847, he's actually out running errands with his two daughters, Elizabeth and Sophie. And while he's out in the center of town in Concord, he suffers from a heart attack and dies basically immediately in his daughter's arms. And he is, soon after laid to rest in Sleepy Hollow, and that is really only a year and a half after he had moved back to the old manse. And this is going to leave Sarah in charge of the house for about the next 20 years, because she lives until 1867. And it will turn out that Sarah is not the abolitionist that Samuel may have hoped for, but his son Ezra certainly is. And so we'll explore Ezra in a bit, but first I just want to talk a bit about Sarah, because she's a really fantastic and interesting individual. There's a reason why there's a book written about her titled The Remarkable Mrs. Ripley. She has a genius intellect. One of the interesting facts we always talk about in the manse about her is that she knew 7 different languages. She's very interested in botany, but she's a tutor and a teacher, very interested in education, and she's tutoring Harvard students as well. She really travels in a lot of these intellectual circles in Concord. Her nephew is Ralph Waldo Emerson by marriage. And so, through Emerson, she knows Thoreau and Alcott, all these individuals. But I would say her closest confidant or companion is a man named Frank Sanborn. Sanborn is an educator just like Sarah, and he loves Greek. And so actually they would, at the old manse, in the small parlor of the old manse, they would spend Monday afternoons together just reading Greek texts, not necessarily teaching one another anything, but just reading it out loud just to get some practice. However, Sarah really doesn't spend a whole lot of time worrying about Frank Sanborn's involvement in the Secret Six. Now, the Secret Six were a group of 6 men who funded and backed the efforts of John Brown during the Harper's Ferry raid, which was one of the pre-Civil War, one of the biggest armed attempts to sort of incite a slave rebellion, and so she doesn't necessarily seem to care about Sanborn's affiliation or interests in abolition. She ends up being pretty silent in a lot of regards. For example, John Brown visits the old manse, but we don't get any firsthand account of John Brown from Sarah, and so it's difficult to sort of try to figure out what she thought about this visit. And she's also not a member of the Concord Female Anti-Slavery Society, which was probably one of the leading and first female anti-slavery societies that had been established. Now, she does break her silence on the issue of anti-slavery a little bit, but when she does, it doesn't paint her in necessarily the best light. For example, there's this moment where she's reading a broadside that describes the conditions on slave ships. And she writes that it disgusts her without exciting me to any part of anti-slavery efforts. And so, this coupled with her very negative perception of the Civil War is going to sort of paint her in a maybe that she wasn't so sympathetic to the abolitionist sympathies. But this is not to say, I think, that Sarah was pro-slavery by any stretch of the imagination. I don't believe this was the case. I believe that Sarah was a very private individual who saw slavery as something that was far removed from her own interests and her own pursuits, and did not feel the need to necessarily comment on it. But nevertheless, this is going to going to put her in a lot of tension with her son Ezra, who very much sees the cause of abolition and the institution of slavery as something that he is personally invested in ending. And so this is going to be a source of tension between the two of them. Now here is a very small and rather blurry image, unfortunately, of the young Ezra. There's a much better one in the next slide. But this is young Ezra. Ezra is born in Waltham, probably in this home right here, in 1826. He is the youngest son of Samuel and Sarah. Like his father and his grandfather before him, he went to Harvard College, but he didn't become a minister. He became a lawyer, and is actually the last year of his time at Harvard is also the year that the Ripleys moved back into Concord, or back into the Old Manse in Concord. And so he is there. He lives there until at least 1850. We have him on the census record, for example. And so he is at the Old Manse after his father's death, and seems at some point between 1850 and 1860, he moves to East Cambridge after he marries a woman named Harriet Hayden, who was another abolitionist. And so this is going to be that connection between those two is also going to be very important. Now, Ezra, before the war, worked as a defense lawyer, but he's also active in his community. He's a Freemason, but more so than just a your run-of-the-mill Freemason. He founded a lodge in East Cambridge and was the first master of the lodge, and very into the Freemasons being very into charity and things like that. He was very active in his community. He is also a member of the school board in East Cambridge, and a lot of his work as a lawyer has direct implications in some criminal justice reform early on. Now, this is a much better picture, I think, of Ezra. I'm a little older, but Ezra really is his father's son. Him being an abolitionist is really he was really inspired by his father and his work, and this is really intensified by his marriage to Harriet. However, there is one other figure that is really important to discuss before launching into Ezra's military service, and that is the figure of John Garrison, who is who's a Concord citizen, but is one of their Concord's most successful free persons of color. And so this is John here. John worked as the Ripley family gardener, and so that's how Ezra and the whole family knew him. But John's history is also a history of enslavement on both sides of his family. He was born in 1815 to Jack Garrison, who escaped slavery in New Jersey, and to Susan Robbins, whose both her parents were enslaved here in Massachusetts.
Oh, I'm on mute now.
Oh, second.
Yeah, I can, but I.
1 second.
Who's that?
Yeah, but when I first came on, you could see me.
Just keep going. She's a founding member of the Concord Female Anti-Slavery Society as well. So John was educated in Concord schools, which allowed him to be, accepted in the predominantly white society. And this acceptance was really important because this allowed him to find jobs in Concord and work decent jobs for decent pay. And so he actually owned a home on Monument Street, which is the same street as the Old Manse. And so he was on the same street as the Old Manse. He was a custodian and worked as the superintendent for a year at the townhouse. He was a firefighter, did a bunch of other jobs as well. But one of the other jobs, the odd jobs he did, was he worked at the Old Manse as the family gardener for, we believe, about 30 years, which is really kind of remarkable. He actually comes to the Old Manse in 1842 and is planting the garden with Henry David Thoreau that was a wedding gift for the Hawthorns as they were moving into the Old Manse. However, John seems to stay on as Thoreau moves on to different pursuits. Garrison stays, and he becomes really a fixture of the Old Manse. And so this is a shot of the Old Manse with one of the gardens on the property. Now, for many in town, but Ezra included very much so, John represented what is possible for a free person of color to achieve with not only freedom but acceptance, and so that was really important for Ezra. So much so that after the firing on Fort Sumter, and the Concord militia is gathering up and they're ready to march south, they actually have a little bit of a rally and celebration that Ezra organizes, and he brings John along with him as his guest. And Sarah writes this of what happened between him and John during the celebration. So she writes that Ezra introduced John Garrison to them and explained his relation to Concord and himself, and so John got an extra cheer. And so here's John kind of being shown as sort of what really sort of in stark contrast to a lot of the racist rhetoric that was going on in the period. That John was a citizen just like every other individual here in the town of Concord, and he was achieving great things. So this connection is really important for someone like Ezra. Now, at the end of this letter, in June 1861, Sarah writes that Ezra had made his decision to fight in the Civil War, and she is not happy about this decision. And in part, at the very end, she writes that I am no Spartan mother, and she has a lot of reservations about Ezra's commitment. But I think she has some legitimate worries. She really did, because Ezra was actually called delicate in his biography by his classmates. He had considered to have a weak constitution, often sickly. He had no financial need to go and fight, coming from a really prominent New England family, had a growing law practice, and he would be leaving behind a wife, though she urged him in a lot of ways, and really was happy that he was going to go serve. So there's a lot of these things that are sort of, he almost has every reason not to fight, but he decides to, and he almost decides to a little too quickly, because he enlists and he has not yet secured his commission to become a lieutenant, and so he's almost reduced to the rank of private, or enters the Union Army at the rank of private. However, his well-known cousin, Ralph Waldo Emerson, writes a letter to Senator Sumner, and that's all taken care of. He's made a third lieutenant, and he goes into the 29th Massachusetts. Now, just a quick caveat before we launch into to Ezra's service. The Civil War is often called a war between brothers, that there were brothers on either side fighting, and in certain cases this was true. It's often metaphorical or figurative. However, this is partially true in the Ripley family. This was a cousins' war, because on the other side of the battle lines, there was a man named Captain Fitzhenry Ripley, who was Ezra's first cousin. He was the son of Daniel Ripley, who was sort of the rebellious a member of the family. Samuel's younger brother got involved in duels and ended up moving down south and starting a family there. And while Ezra was graduating Harvard, Fitzhenry was fighting in the Mexican-American War, and then during the Civil War, he joins Company A of the 9th Alabama, and his service is a little wonky, and so we're not really clear on how long he served and if there were two different stints of service, but he ends up dying at the Battle of Spanish Fort, which is fought just days before the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse. So just a little bit of a caveat, but to show you that this is affecting the family in a lot of different ways. And so here is sort of the first of three different slides I have about Ezra's service in the war, because I think he has a really sort of incredible and unlikely service. He begins initially behind the front lines. He is a judge advocate. They're using his skills as a lawyer to putting them to good use, and then he works as an aide de camp. He is seen to be pretty competent, so he's promoted to first lieutenant not too long after his entry into the war. Before long, though, he goes to the front lines and ends up participating in the Peninsular Campaign under McClellan, and this ends up being a pretty big failure for the Union forces. But Ezra is there, and he is fighting through what is called a couple different things. The 7 days before Richmond is one of them. There's the 7 days battle, but it's really the culminating event of the campaign. 7 days long, as the name suggests. And he falls ill after the battle and is actually sent home in July of 1862. Now, by September, he is ready to go, although his family doesn't necessarily think so. He requests to be transported back to the front lines. He gets there on September 16th. He gets there back to his unit, and this is 1 day before the Battle of Antietam. Ezra's commanding officer sort of advises him that he should probably remain behind. He doesn't look well enough to fight. However, it's probably because he was a really good lawyer. He is able to convince his commanding officer to let him fight through the Battle of Antietam, and he does. He goes, he joins the 29th in the battle. They're at a particular area of Antietam known as the Sunken Road or the Bloody Lane, depending on what account you're looking at, which is what you can see pictured here. This is one of the most intense portions of the fighting, and it definitely leaves an impact on Ezra, and it's one of the few moments that we do have some evidence of him writing back his opinions and thoughts about the sort of the horrors of war, is what he had to deal with at Antietam. But just shortly after Antietam, the Emancipation Proclamation is issued, and this is great news for. This is great news for Ezra and the millions of enslaved individuals located in the Confederate States. However, this is initially pretty bad news for the Union Army because desertions become a widespread problem. And so in response to this, Ezra is actually one of the individuals who's pulled out of the front lines and sent on recruitment duty because of his education, because of his background, to really try and bolster the troops and bring more troops in. Now, there was also talk at this time that he might have been moved into one of the newly forming colored regiments of African Americans that were now being authorized by the Emancipation Proclamation. And these regiments were staffed by white officers who had abolitionist sympathies more often than not. So think of Robert Gould Shaw, individuals like that. And so there was talk of him sort of being put in a position like that. However, he does not, he's never made or promoted into a role like that or moved into a role like that because he arrives back at the front line just in time for the siege of Vicksburg. He ends up fighting through the siege, but he's wounded in the leg. It's unclear what the wound was, but whatever the wound was, it was severe enough for them to tell him to stay behind and rest. And so he does initially. However, when he catches word that his commanding officer has fallen ill, he decides he needs to be with his men. So he rides out in the July heat to be with them, and he makes it. However, when he gets there, he is so sick that he is ordered to be sent home to be furloughed again. But Ezra never makes it, unfortunately. He dies en route to Concord in Helena, Arkansas on July 28th, 1863 at 11 p.m. Now, Ezra's impact, I think I'd like to talk about his impact for both the family and also for us today. For the family, it does different things to different members of his family. For Sarah, she seems to not talk about him after his death. Ezra's not mentioned in written correspondence after his death, and she lives to see the end of the Civil War in 1867. However, by that point, she's really retreated further into her private life, and so we really get nothing from Sarah, maybe more of a retreat into her personal life. But for Harriet, Ezra's wife, his death is really a call to action. She goes down to Washington, D.C. after she hears news of his death and works as a Civil War nurse throughout the rest of the war. So you can see different parts of the family. The death impacts them differently. Now, for us at the Old Manse, This home is often called the home of two revolutions, the American Revolution and then the Transcendentalist Revolution. But I think Ezra's story and Samuel is a part of that, and even Sarah, I think, looking at the whole big picture of the abolitionist movement, it shows us that abolition is a serious contender for a third revolution that we can lay claim to at the old manse. Now the results, I always view the Civil War as being sort of, in a way, a fulfillment of the American ideals that were set forth in the American Revolution. And so as bloody and as violent as the Civil War was, it was really a living into some of the uniquely American ideals at the time that had not been lived up to during the country's initial founding. And so that is, I think Ezra is a part of that. I think, if we look at William Emerson, who is the initial occupant of the old manse, that he gave his life for a new nation, for freedom and liberty, while also simultaneously denying the freedom and liberty of certain individuals. And Ezra's sacrifice really is to take those same principles William was fighting for and then apply them to a subsection of the population that had been denied those rights throughout this country's history. So I think that is what Ezra means to me, and and what his story has meant to me as I've been researching it. Before I end, the one thing I do want to, I always have this question as to why he fought, because again, he could have just been he could have written things and work and published pamphlets and Liberator, things like that. Why did he choose to fight? And I think his words sums all of this up the best, because in some of his final words before his death, he writes, and I'll sort of end the presentation here. I'll leave it with Ezra's words. He writes that, I could not help thinking we indeed had a country worth fighting for. To think that we were in danger of losing a great and good government which offers freedom and equal rights to all, whose very greatness is shown in her struggle for existence, made me almost frantic. If anything were needed to make me feel the necessity of working in the good cause to the last, to give the last drop to my country, this journey has convinced me. God forgive me if I hesitate or falter now. And those are some of the final words he wrote before his death, before the siege of Vicksburg. So thank you. This presentation and everything I have here is freely available to anyone who's interested in it. Just a quick rundown of thank yous to the Waltham Historical Society, of course, for hosting this presentation. The Old Manse, the Robbins House, which is where you can find some interesting history about John Garrison. The Trustees Ark, the archives of the trustees, and then the Concord Free Public Library. Both incredible resources for research. And then here's just some further reading if you're interested in learning more about the topic. So that is all I have. I'd be happy to take some questions. Oh, here's some contact information, sorry. If you ever want to reach out for anything, any of this material, either email works. Please feel free to reach out. Thank you very much.